Commander Zarxel stared out the viewport as his ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. The blue planet grew larger by the second, its swirling clouds parting to reveal land masses and oceans. His four-fingered hand tightened around the armrest of his command chair. "We will be landing in 5 minutes, Commander," said the pilot, her scaled fingers dancing across the control panel. Zarxel nodded, his expression stern. As a high-ranking officer in the Vexarian Galactic Alliance, he had visited dozens of worlds, but Earth was different. The humans were a puzzle to his people. They were physically weak, with no natural defenses, yet they had advanced rapidly, and now stood at the threshold of joining the galactic community. "Remember your place here, Commander," said Admiral Krell during their final briefing. "This is a diplomatic mission. Observe their military academy, share appropriate information about our training methods, and report back. Nothing more." What the Admiral didn't say, but what everyone knew was that the Vexarian High Command considered humans to be primitive. Zarxel himself had watched recordings of human conflicts with a mixture of fascination and disgust. They were brutal, chaotic affairs compared to the precise, almost surgical warfare practiced by his people. Lieutenant Krex approached and stood at attention. The younger officer was to be his aide during this mission. "The human delegation awaits us at their military airfield, Commander. I have prepared your diplomatic notes." "Thank you, Lieutenant," said Zarxel. "And remember, these humans may look soft, but they control this planet. We will show appropriate respect." "Of course, Commander," replied Krex, though his tone suggested he found the idea of respecting humans difficult. The ship landed with barely a tremor. Zarxel rose to his full 7-foot height, his blue scales catching the artificial light. He wore his formal military uniform, adorned with the medals and honors of his distinguished career. The door hissed open, revealing a bright spring day in a place the humans called New York State. A small delegation waited on the tarmac. Zarxel stepped out, feeling the strange gravity and breathing in the unusually nitrogen-rich air. His species had evolved on a heavier world with different atmospheric composition, but the discomfort was minimal. A human female stepped forward. She was barely over 5.5 feet tall, with short brown hair and what Zarxel recognized as a formal military uniform, though it seemed flimsy compared to Vexarian battle dress. "Commander Zarxel, welcome to Earth. I'm Captain Laura Bennett of the United States Army. On behalf of West Point Military Academy, it's my honor to welcome you." Zarxel placed his right hand across his chest in the formal Vexarian greeting. "Captain Bennett, I bring greetings from the Vexarian Galactic Alliance. I look forward to learning about your military training methods." A taller human male stepped forward next. "Colonel Frank Martinez, Commandant of Cadets. We're honored by your visit, Commander." Zarxel studied the human male. His file indicated this Martinez had seen actual combat, which made him somewhat more interesting than most humans Zarxel had researched. "The honor is mine, Colonel. My government believes much can be gained through this exchange." This was diplomatic. Speak, of course. What the Vexarian High Command actually believed was that little of value would come from studying human military techniques, but that allowing humans to learn from superior Vexarian methods might help them develop faster and become useful allies sooner. Captain Bennett gestured toward a nearby vehicle. "We've arranged transportation to the academy. There will be a small welcome ceremony, and then you can rest before tomorrow's activities." The trip to the academy took less than 15 minutes. Zarxel spent it watching the landscape and listening to Captain Bennett's explanations of the history of the region. He noted how the humans had shaped their environment to suit their needs, cutting roads through forests and building structures across the natural landscape. "Your academy is quite old by human standards?" Zarxel asked. "Yes, Commander. West Point was established in 1802. It's one of our oldest and most prestigious military institutions." Zarxel converted the date in his mind. Barely over 2 centuries. When this academy was founded, Vexarians had already been a spacefaring civilization for nearly 1,000 years. The gap in development was even greater than he had realized. The academy itself was more impressive than Zarxel had expected. The stone buildings had a certain dignity to them, and the setting overlooking a river was quite strategic from a defensive perspective. "The cadets are eager to meet you," said Colonel Martinez as they walked across a green field toward a formation of young humans in gray uniforms. "We've selected a cross-section of our best students for the demonstrations over the next few days." Zarxel nodded. "I look forward to observing your training methods." The welcoming ceremony was mercifully brief. Zarxel stood on a platform while a human in an elaborate uniform spoke about friendship between species and the honor of this first military exchange. A band played strange music that hurt Zarxel's sensitive ears, and the cadets performed precise movements that he recognized as a form of ceremonial drill. Later, in the guest quarters assigned to him, Zarxel reviewed his notes while Lieutenant Krex unpacked their equipment. "What do you think so far, Commander?" asked the young lieutenant. Zarxel considered the question. "They are trying very hard to impress us. That suggests insecurity." "As they should be," said Krex. "Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their weapons are primitive. Even their physical forms are weak. Do not underestimate them," cautioned Zarxel. "Remember our briefings. What humans lack in natural advantages, they have often compensated for in other ways. With respect, Commander, what could we possibly learn from them? Their wars are chaotic and inefficient. They lack the genetic advantages that make Vexarians natural warriors." Zarxel stared out the window at the parade ground, where cadets were now going about their regular activities. "That is precisely what interests me, Lieutenant. Despite their limitations, humans have dominated their world and advanced rapidly. I want to understand how they compensate for their weaknesses." A knock at the door interrupted them. Captain Bennett stood there with a digital tablet. "Commander, I've brought the schedule for tomorrow. We'll begin with observing morning physical training, followed by classroom instruction on tactical operations. After lunch, you'll see specialized training in our combat simulation center." Zarxel took the tablet, noting how small it seemed in his large hands. "Thank you, Captain. I have one request." "Of course." "I would like to see your cadets at their most challenged, not just ceremonial displays or carefully prepared demonstrations." Captain Bennett smiled, and something in that expression made Zarxel feel uneasy. "That won't be a problem, Commander. At West Point, we believe in pushing our cadets to their limits and beyond. By the end of your visit, you'll see exactly what humans are capable of under pressure." After she left, Lieutenant Krex said quietly, "She almost sounded proud of their suffering." "Yes," said Zarxel thoughtfully. "That is something we should pay attention to." As night fell over the academy, Zarxel found himself wondering what the next few days would reveal. The humans seemed so fragile compared to his people, yet there was something in their demeanor that suggested hidden depths. He reminded himself that appearances could be deceiving, especially when dealing with an alien species. Tomorrow he would begin to see what truly made human warriors. Despite himself, he was curious. The morning air was crisp and cool as Commander Zarxel followed Captain Bennett to the large open field where cadets had gathered before sunrise. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the clouds with soft pink and orange hues. Zarxel's species needed less sleep than humans, but he noted that the cadets showed no signs of fatigue despite the early hour. "Physical training begins at 5:30 every day," Captain Bennett explained. "All cadets participate, regardless of their academic focus." Zarxel watched as the young humans arranged themselves in neat rows. A muscular instructor stood at the front, calling out commands in a loud voice. As one, the cadets began a series of movements that Zarxel recognized as strength-building exercises. "Your training seems basic," Zarxel observed. On Vexarian military academies, cadets trained with advanced gravity manipulation and neural stimulation. Colonel Martinez, who had joined them, smiled slightly. "The fundamentals never go out of style, Commander. Push-ups, sit-ups, running. These exercises have built soldiers for thousands of years." As the training progressed, Zarxel noticed something unexpected. The exercises became increasingly difficult and some cadets began to struggle. Their faces showed pain. Their limbs trembled with effort and some even collapsed momentarily before forcing themselves to continue. "That cadet there," Zarxel pointed to a young male whose face was contorted with effort. He appears to be in distress. Should he not be removed from training? Captain Bennett shook her head. Cadet Allen knows his limits. Part of the training is learning to push past what your mind tells you is impossible. You deliberately caused them pain? Lieutenant Krex asked, unable to hide his disgust. Not pain for its own sake, Colonel Martinez explained. Growth requires stress. Just like a muscle must be torn to grow stronger, a soldier's will must be tested to develop resilience. They continued watching as the cadets moved from strength exercises to a running course. Zarxel noticed that the instructors paid special attention to those who were struggling, not to excuse them but to push them harder. Faster, Cadet Ramirez. Your enemy won't wait for you to catch your breath. An instructor shouted at a young female who was clearly exhausted. To Zarxel's surprise, the cadet didn't show resentment but instead gritted her teeth and increased her pace. When one cadet stumbled and twisted his ankle on the running track, Zarxel expected the human to be removed from training. Instead, after a quick examination by a medical officer, the cadet was given a supportive bandage and rejoined the group, though clearly in pain. He is injured, Zarxel said. Why allow him to continue? Cadet Wilson made the choice, Captain Bennett said. In combat, you don't get to quit because of a minor injury. He's learning that now in a controlled environment. Zarxel fell silent, contemplating this approach. Vexarian military training emphasized proper technique and efficiency. Injury was seen as failure, not an opportunity for growth. After the physical training concluded, they moved to a classroom building. Here, cadets sat at desks while an instructor led a discussion on military strategy. The walls were covered with maps and diagrams of famous battles. Today we're examining the Battle of Thermopylae, the instructor announced. 300 Spartans, against a Persian force of over 100,000. Who can tell me why this battle remains relevant to modern warfare? A female cadet raised her hand. Sir, it demonstrates how a smaller force, in an advantageous position, can hold off a much larger enemy through superior training and tactics. Exactly, Cadet Garcia. And what lesson can we apply from this to potential space-based conflicts? Zarxel listened with growing interest as the cadets discussed strategies for fighting against technologically superior forces. The humans seemed obsessed with the concept of the underdog prevailing against overwhelming odds. This was fundamentally different from Vexarian military philosophy, which emphasized overwhelming force and technological superiority. During a break in the classroom session, Zarxel approached the instructor. Your teaching focuses heavily on historical conflicts where humans were at a disadvantage. Why not focus on scenarios where you would have superiority? The instructor, Major Gregory Johnson, smiled. Because history teaches us that we're rarely as superior as we think we are. Commander, better to prepare for the worst and be pleasantly surprised than the alternative. The day continued with a tour of the simulation facilities. Here, cadets trained in virtual environments that replicated various combat scenarios. Zarxel was impressed with the technology, though it was still primitive by Vexarian standards. We can simulate any environment, Captain Bennett explained, as they watched cadets navigating a virtual urban combat zone. Desert, jungle, Arctic conditions, even low-gravity situations based on what we've learned about other planets. The scenarios seem unnecessarily difficult, Lieutenant Krex observed as they watched a team of cadets repeatedly fail to achieve their objective. That's intentional, Colonel Martinez said. We design scenarios that cannot be solved with brute force or standard tactics. They require creative thinking and adaptation. Zarxel watched as the cadets regrouped after another failure. Instead of showing frustration, they were energetically discussing new approaches, their faces animated with determination. They do not become discouraged by failure, Zarxel noted. Failure is the best teacher, Captain Bennett replied. We track success rates, of course, but what we're really measuring is how quickly cadets adapt after failing. The lunch period provided another surprise. Rather than a quiet, orderly meal like those in Vexarian academies, the dining hall was filled with noise as cadets discussed their morning activities while eating quickly. They have only 20 minutes to eat, Captain Bennett explained. Time management is part of the training. Zarxel observed the food the cadets were consuming, a mix of proteins, carbohydrates, and vegetables. The nutritional content seems adequate, if basic. Military rations aren't known for flavor, Colonel Martinez said with a slight smile. Another form of training, learning to fuel your body efficiently without concern for pleasure. After lunch, they observed hand-to-hand combat training. Here, Zarxel expected to see the human's weakness most clearly. Vexarians were naturally stronger, with dense muscle structure and tough scales for protection. Humans seemed fragile in comparison, their skins soft and vulnerable. Yet again, the alien commander found himself surprised. The cadets fought with surprising intensity. They used techniques that leveraged body mechanics rather than raw strength, and they showed a remarkable tolerance for pain. When one cadet received a hard blow to the face, drawing blood from his nose, Zarxel expected the session to stop. Instead, after a quick check to ensure no serious damage, the instructor encouraged the cadet to continue. "Your enemy won't care that you're injured, Cadet Price. Show me how you adapt." By the end of the day, Zarxel found himself reevaluating his initial assumptions. As they walked back to the guest quarters, Lieutenant Krex voiced his concerns. "They seem to embrace suffering, Commander. It's primitive and unnecessary." Zarxel considered this. Perhaps. Or perhaps there is something we are missing, Lieutenant. Their approach is different, certainly, but I'm beginning to wonder if there might be advantages to it that we have not considered. That night, Zarxel made extensive notes in his report. The humans were indeed physically weaker than Vexarians in every measurable way. Their technology was less advanced, their natural abilities limited. Yet there was an intensity to their training that was both disturbing and, he reluctantly admitted, somewhat admirable. Tomorrow would bring more observations, and Zarxel found himself genuinely curious about what he would discover next about these strange, fragile creatures who seemed to transform pain into strength. The third day of Commander Zarxel's visit began earlier than the previous ones. Captain Bennett arrived at his quarters before dawn, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. "We have a special demonstration today, Commander," she said. "Our survival training unit begins at 400. Zarxel nodded and followed her outside. Lieutenant Krex trailed behind them, looking less enthusiastic about the early start. They traveled by helicopter to a remote area in nearby mountains. The landscape below was rugged and covered with dense forest. As they landed in a small clearing, Zarxel saw a group of 20 cadets standing at attention, dressed in camouflage uniforms with heavy packs on their backs. Major Samuel Wright greeted them as they disembarked. He was a lean, weathered human, with intense eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Welcome to Phase 2 survival training," he said. "These cadets have been in the field for 3 days already with minimal supplies. Today they begin their evasion exercise." "Evasion?" asked Zarxel. "They must travel 15 miles through difficult terrain to reach an extraction point," Major Wright explained. "Meanwhile, another group of advanced cadets will hunt them down. Those who are caught experience our prisoner resistance training." Lieutenant Krex looked at the cadets more carefully. "They appear undernourished and fatigued." "That's the point," Major Wright said without apology. "In real combat situations, soldiers rarely operate at peak physical condition. They need to function effectively despite hunger, exhaustion, and stress." Zarxel watched as the cadets checked their minimal equipment. Their faces showed fatigue but also determination. One female cadet had a visible limp, yet she was preparing her pack like the others. "That cadet is injured," Zarxel pointed out. "Cadet Powell twisted her knee yesterday," Major Wright confirmed. "She was given the option to withdraw but declined." "Why? Would she continue in a compromised state?" Lieutenant Krex asked. "It seems illogical." Captain Bennett answered, "Because in real combat, you don't get to tap out when things get difficult. Sometimes you have to complete the mission despite injuries." The cadets were soon dispatched into the forest in small teams of 2. Zarxel, Captain Bennett, and Major Wright followed one team in a quiet all-terrain vehicle that allowed them to observe without interfering. Cadets Powell and Morgan moved through the dense forest with surprising stealth despite their obvious fatigue. They communicated with hand signals, conserved their energy, and used the terrain to their advantage. When they encountered a fast-moving stream, they didn't hesitate but worked together to cross it, even though the cold water clearly caused them discomfort. They will develop illness from these wet conditions, Lieutenant Krex predicted. Possibly, Major Wright acknowledged. But they'll learn that their bodies can endure more than their minds believe possible. Throughout the morning, Zarxel observed different cadet teams navigating the challenges of the wilderness. Some were indeed caught by the opposing force. When this happened, they were processed as prisoners, questioned aggressively though not physically harmed, and placed in uncomfortable positions for extended periods. This seems unnecessarily harsh, Zarxel commented as they watched a captured cadet holding a stress position, his face contorted with effort. "We disagree, Commander," said Major Wright. "Every major conflict in human history has resulted in prisoners of war. We'd be failing these cadets if we didn't prepare them for that possibility." By midday, they returned to the academy for Zarxel to observe different training. This session focused on psychological resilience. In a specialized training facility, cadets were subjected to various forms of stress: loud noises, sleep deprivation, conflicting orders, and information overload. "The mind breaks before the body," explained Dr. Olivia Chen, the civilian psychologist who oversaw this training. "We teach cadets to recognize the signs of mental fatigue and develop techniques to maintain clarity under extreme conditions." Zarxel watched as a team of cadets attempted to solve complex problems while being bombarded with distractions. Despite visible signs of stress, they maintained focus on their tasks. "Humans are remarkably adaptable," Zarxel observed. "It's our greatest strength," Dr. Chen agreed. "Physically, we're not the strongest species on our own planet, let alone the galaxy. We've survived because we can adapt to almost any condition and continue functioning." After the psychological training, they moved to the weapons range. Here, cadets practiced with various firearms under increasingly difficult conditions: limited visibility, physical exertion before shooting, and simulated battlefield distractions. "Your weapons technology is primitive," Lieutenant Krex noted as they observed the training. "But effective enough," Colonel Martinez replied, having joined them again. "And these cadets will be able to use them effectively under conditions that would make perfect technology useless." Zarxel noticed something interesting as he watched the firearms training. When a weapon malfunctioned, the cadet didn't stop or call for assistance but immediately went through a practice sequence to clear the malfunction and continue firing. "You train them to expect equipment failure," he said. "We train them to overcome it," Colonel Martinez corrected. "The best technology in the universe is worthless if it stops working when you need it most." The day continued with demonstrations of various specialized training, from urban combat to electronic warfare. In each area, Zarxel noted the same pattern. Cadets were deliberately placed in disadvantageous positions and expected to adapt and overcome. During a brief break, Zarxel found himself alone with Captain Bennett. "Captain, I must ask, why do humans embrace such difficult training methods? My species would consider much of this unnecessarily harsh." Bennett considered her answer carefully. "Commander, throughout human history, we've rarely had the luxury of fighting on equal terms. We've always had to overcome something: superior numbers, better weapons, harsh environments. Our training reflects that reality." "You train as if you expect to be at a disadvantage," Zarxel realized. "Exactly. Then, if we ever fight on equal footing, it feels easy by comparison." That evening, a demonstration had been arranged that particularly interested Zarxel. A group of cadets who had been awake for nearly 48 hours straight were going through a complex nighttime exercise that required them to infiltrate a guarded compound, retrieve sensitive information, and exfiltrate without detection. Despite their exhaustion, the cadets moved with discipline and purpose. When unexpected challenges were introduced, guards changing patterns, equipment failures, a simulated injury to a team member, they adjusted their plans without hesitation. "Impressive," Zarxel admitted as they watched from a monitoring station. "Even in their diminished state, they remain effective." "Humans break easily, Commander," Major Wright said beside him. "Our advantage is that we know it. We can be broken, rebuilt, and come back stronger. Pain is information. Failure is education. This philosophy disturbed Zarxel deeply. Vexarians believed in consistent improvement through technology and genetic refinement. The idea of deliberately experiencing failure to learn from it was alien to their thinking. Later that night, Zarxel sat in his quarters updating his report to the High Command. Lieutenant Krex paced nervously. "Commander, you seem impressed by these humans," he said, his tone concerned. "Surely you don't believe their primitive methods have merit compared to our advanced training systems?" Zarxel looked up from his work. "I am not impressed, Lieutenant, I am disturbed. These humans don't just accept suffering, they seek it out as a teacher. They don't just overcome limitations, they deliberately impose them to develop adaptability. But surely that makes them less effective than Vexarian troops, not more." Zarxel wasn't certain anymore. Perhaps in a conventional confrontation. But what happens when plans fail? When technology fails? When everything goes wrong? The Vexarian response is to retreat and regroup with proper resources. These humans... He paused, considering the implications of what he had witnessed. These humans would keep fighting, adapting, finding new ways to continue. That kind of tenacity might be more dangerous than any weapon. On the fourth day, Commander Zarxel requested access to the Academy's combat records and historical archives. His request was granted without hesitation, which surprised him. Vexarians guarded their military history carefully, sharing it only with trusted allies. "We believe in learning from the past," Captain Bennett explained as she led him to the Academy's digital library. "Even our failures, especially our failures, have valuable lessons." The library was a large room filled with screens and data, terminals. Several cadets worked quietly at stations, studying battle simulations and historical campaigns. Lieutenant Krex remained outside, having been called to communicate with their ship. "I've arranged for you to meet with someone who might provide context for what you're seeing," Captain Bennett said. She gestured toward an elderly human male sitting at a table in the corner. The man wore a simple uniform with several small medals pinned to his chest. His face was deeply lined and one of his legs was clearly artificial. He stood as they approached, moving with a slight limp. "Commander Zarxel, this is retired General William Patterson. He has served in multiple conflicts and now teaches military history here at the Academy." Zarxel placed his hand over his chest in the Vexarian greeting. "General Patterson, I am honored." The old soldier nodded. "Likewise, Commander, I understand you're interested in human military history." "Yes. I find your species' approach to warfare unexpected." General Patterson smiled slightly. "Have a seat. Captain Bennett tells me you've been watching our cadets train." "I have. Your methods seem deliberately difficult." "They are." The general's voice was rough but clear. "Would you like to know why?" Zarxel nodded. "Because war is difficult, Commander. It's messy, painful, and rarely goes according to plan. Our training reflects that reality." Over the next hour, General Patterson shared stories from human conflicts, spanning centuries. He spoke of battles where humans faced overwhelming odds, of soldiers who continued fighting despite terrible injuries, of units that adapted to impossible situations and somehow prevailed. "This leg," Patterson said, tapping his prosthetic limb. "I lost it when I was a young officer. Stepped on a mine. In your military, would that have ended my career?" Zarxel hesitated before answering truthfully. "Yes. A Vexarian warrior with such an injury would be honorably retired from combat duty. That's the difference then. I was back leading troops 6 months later. Different leg, same soldier." The general's eyes held Zarxel's gaze. Humans don't define themselves by their limitations. A cadet approached with a data tablet, which Patterson accepted with a nod of thanks. "I've prepared some historical battle simulations for you to review, Commander. Each one represents a situation where human forces faced technologically superior enemies." Zarxel spent the next 2 hours reviewing the simulations. He watched ancient humans with bronze weapons defeat enemies with iron. He saw armies overcome, forces with superior numbers through creative tactics. Most disturbing were the modern examples. Guerrilla forces with basic weapons defeating advanced military units through sheer tenacity and adaptability. Your history is a continuous sequence of conflict, Zarxel observed when he finally looked up from the tablet. Yes, General Patterson agreed. Unfortunate but true. War has been our harshest teacher. And yet you've survived, despite your physical limitations. Because of them in some ways, Patterson replied. Necessity drives innovation. When you can't win through strength, you find other paths to victory. Captain Bennett, who had been quietly observing, added, It's why we focus so much on adaptability in our training. The ability to function when everything goes wrong is more valuable than having everything go right. After lunch, Zarxel was shown the Academy's Innovation Center, where cadets worked on projects ranging from new tactical approaches to modified equipment designs. Each class is challenged to solve problems with limited resources, explained Major Natalie Foster, who oversaw the center. We deliberately restrict their access to advanced technology. Why? Asked Zarxel. Because in real combat situations, you don't always have the luxury of perfect equipment. Sometimes you have to make do with what's available. Zarxel watched as cadets demonstrated their projects. One team had created a communication system using salvaged parts that could function despite electronic interference. Another had developed a water filtration method using only items commonly found in rural areas. They're quite ingenious, Zarxel admitted. Humans adapt or die, Major Foster said simply. It's been the story of our species. The afternoon brought a scenario that particularly interested Zarxel. Cadets were placed in a simulation where all technology above a certain level suddenly failed. They had to complete a complex mission using only basic tools and equipment. We call this a back-to-basics drill, Colonel Martinez explained as they watched from an observation room. Technology fails, plans fail, communications fail. When everything is stripped away, what remains is the fundamental human soldier, adaptable, resilient, and determined. The cadets in the simulation quickly reorganized, establishing alternative communication methods, improvising tools, and adjusting their tactics to the new reality. Despite the significant challenges, they completed their objectives, though not without difficulties and simulated casualties. Your cadets expect failure, Zarxel observed. They plan for it. We prefer to call it planning for contingencies, Colonel Martinez replied. But yes, we train them to expect that things will go wrong and to have multiple backup plans. Later, that evening, Zarxel was invited to observe a special training exercise, a night raid conducted by senior cadets who had been given deliberately faulty intelligence. As the exercise unfolded, Zarxel watched the cadets discover that their target was not where they expected. Their extraction point was compromised, and their communication systems were being jammed. Instead of aborting the mission, they quickly reassessed, developed a new plan, and continued. When one of their team was injured in the simulation, they adapted again, with one cadet carrying his teammate while others provided cover. Most impressive, Zarxel said to Captain Bennett. Even when everything went wrong, they continued functioning effectively. That's the point of all this training, she replied. Any soldier can follow a plan when everything works perfectly. The true test is what happens when it all falls apart. As they walked back to his quarters, Zarxel was unusually quiet. His mind was processing everything he had witnessed over the past days. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from the Vexarian philosophy. Where his people sought perfection through technology and genetic superiority, humans embraced their imperfections and learned to overcome them through sheer determination. You seem troubled, Commander, Captain Bennett observed. I am reassessing certain assumptions, Zarxel admitted. Your species is physically weaker than mine in every measurable way. Yet you train as if expecting to fight enemies far stronger than yourselves. That's because we always have, Bennett replied. Human history is full of underdogs overcoming overwhelming odds. It's in our nature to prepare for worst-case scenarios. Back in his quarters, Zarxel found Lieutenant Krex waiting with a message from the Vexarian High Command. They were requesting a preliminary assessment of human military capabilities. "What shall I tell them, Commander?" asked Krex. Zarksul stared out the window at the darkened academy grounds, thinking of everything he had witnessed. "Tell them," he paused, carefully choosing his words. "Tell them we may have significantly underestimated these humans." For the first time since arriving on Earth, Commander Zarksul felt something he had not expected, a growing sense of concern about humanity's potential. Not because they were currently a threat, but because of what they might become if ever they were threatened. The final day of Commander Zarksul's visit to West Point began with a demonstration that the Academy staff had reserved until the end. Captain Bennett arrived early at his quarters, her expression more serious than usual. "Commander, today you'll observe our most advanced training programs," she said. "These involve cadets who are being prepared for special operations roles." Zarksul nodded, curious about what new aspects of human military training he would discover. Lieutenant Krex followed them, his initial dismissive attitude now replaced with cautious interest. They were taken to a secluded training facility several miles from the main academy. Here, a smaller group of cadets was engaged in exercises that pushed human endurance to extremes. They had been awake for over 72 hours, had minimal food and water, and were still performing complex tactical operations with surprising effectiveness. "How are they still functioning?" Lieutenant Krex asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Major Samuel Wright, who had rejoined them for this final day, answered, "The mind can overcome the body's limitations when properly trained. These cadets have learned to separate discomfort from disability." They observed as the cadets executed a complex hostage rescue scenario. The simulation included unexpected obstacles, equipment failures, and changing mission parameters. Despite their exhausted state, the cadets adjusted their plans smoothly, communicating with minimal words and maximizing their limited resources. "Notice how they support each other," Captain Bennett pointed out. "When one weakens, others compensate without being told to do so." Zarksul watched a female cadet who was clearly struggling. Her movements were slower than her teammates, her reactions delayed. Yet rather than becoming a liability, she seemed to recognize her condition and adjusted her role, taking up a support position while her stronger teammates handled the more physically demanding tasks. "They self-organize based on current capabilities," Zarksul observed. "Exactly," said Major Wright. "We don't want soldiers who are only effective when they're at 100%. Real combat rarely allows for that luxury." After the morning demonstrations, they moved to an advanced weapons training facility. Here, cadets were working with prototype equipment, learning to adapt their tactics to new capabilities and limitations. "Your weapons technology is still primitive, compared to ours," Lieutenant Krex noted as they watched cadets training with advanced rifles. Colonel Martinez, who had joined them again, smiled slightly. "Perhaps, but I'd wager our cadets could become effective with your weapons more quickly than your soldiers could adapt to losing them." The statement hung in the air, its implication clear. Humans prepared for disadvantage as a matter of course. Vexarians, accustomed to technological superiority, rarely considered such scenarios. During lunch, Commander Zarksul was introduced to several senior cadets who would soon graduate and become officers. He was struck by their confidence and curiosity. They asked thoughtful questions about Vexarian military organization and tactics, showing neither intimidation nor arrogance. "What would you consider the greatest strength of Vexarian forces, Commander?" asked Cadet Lisa Johnson, a tall young woman with intelligent eyes. Zarksul considered the question carefully. "Our natural physical advantages combined with superior technology create a formidable force." "And your greatest vulnerability?" She pressed, earning a sharp look from Colonel Martinez. After a moment's hesitation, Zarksul answered honestly, "Perhaps an over-reliance on those same advantages. Your question is perceptive." The cadet nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Zarksul found himself unsettled by the exchange. This cadet wasn't just asking out of curiosity, she was already thinking about how humans might overcome Vexarian strengths in a potential conflict. The afternoon brought a formal farewell ceremony. The Academy Commandant presented Zarksul with a ceremonial sword, a traditional gift representing respect between military organizations. This pattern of sword has been carried by American officers for over 2 centuries, the commandant explained. It represents our history and our commitment to honor. Zarxel accepted the weapon with appropriate ceremony. The blade was beautifully crafted but primitive compared to Vexarian weapons. Yet as he held it, he understood it represented something his people might have forgotten. That effective warfare wasn't just about technology and natural advantages, but about the determination and adaptability of those who wielded the weapons. The ceremony concluded, Captain Bennett walked with Zarxel toward the landing pad where his ship waited. "What will you tell your superiors about us?" she asked directly. Zarxel appreciated her forthrightness. The truth, that humans approach warfare in ways very different from Vexarians, that what you lack in natural advantages, you compensate for with remarkable adaptability. "And is that assessment favorable or concerning from your perspective?" she pressed. Zarxel paused before answering. "Both. Your methods are effective for your species. Whether they would be effective against mine is uncertain." Captain Bennett smiled slightly. "Let's hope we never have to find out." Lieutenant Krex had gone ahead to prepare the ship, leaving Zarxel and Bennett alone for these final moments. "There's something I've been wondering, Commander," Bennett said. "Why did your people send a military observer as one of your first official contacts with Earth? Most species would send scientists or diplomats first." The question caught Zarxel off guard. "I cannot answer that." Bennett nodded as if his non-answer had confirmed something. "I thought as much. Well, whatever your reasons, I hope your report encourages peaceful relations between our species." When Zarxel boarded his ship, Lieutenant Krex was already at the control panel. "The High Command is requesting an immediate briefing upon our return, Commander." "I expect they would," Zarxel replied, storing the ceremonial sword carefully in a secure compartment. As the ship rose through Earth's atmosphere, Zarxel looked down at the blue planet below. His mission had been to assess human military capabilities and determine if they posed any threat to Vexarian interests. What he would report was far more complex than a simple threat assessment. Upon reaching their main vessel in orbit, Zarxel went directly to the secure communication chamber. The faces of the Vexarian High Command appeared on the large screen before him. "Commander Zarxel, we await your assessment of human military capabilities," said Admiral Krell. Zarxel stood straight, his expression serious. "I must report that we have significantly underestimated the humans." A murmur ran through the High Command. Admiral Krell leaned forward. "Explain." "The humans are not to be underestimated," Zarxel began. "What they lack in natural strength, they compensate for with an unparalleled drive to overcome their limitations. They do not train soldiers as we do. They forge warriors through methods we would consider cruel and unnecessary. Their history is an unbroken chain of conflict that has shaped their psychology in ways we cannot fully comprehend." He continued, describing the training he had witnessed, the adaptability of the cadets, and their capacity to function effectively under conditions that would cause Vexarian forces to falter. Most concerning is their fundamental approach to warfare. We Vexarians fight when necessary, using our natural advantages. Humans fight as if they expect to be at a disadvantage, and have developed strategies to win anyway. They train not just for victory but for survival under conditions that would cause our forces to collapse. His final assessment silenced the High Command. The diplomatic approach was correct. Under no circumstances should we consider hostile action toward Earth. These humans do not just prepare for war, they transform through it. They expect suffering and use it as a forge. If forced into conflict with a technologically superior force, they would not surrender. They would adapt, endure, and eventually overcome through means we cannot predict. As the transmission ended, Zarxel looked again at the ceremonial sword, given to him by the humans. It was both beautiful and terrible, much like the species that had created it. A primitive weapon, yet in the right hands, still deadly effective. Commander Zarxel knew that his report would change Vexarian policy toward Earth. The humans would no longer be viewed as primitive curiosities, but as potential allies, or potential threats, to be approached with careful respect. He had come to observe and returned with a warning. The humans were far more dangerous than anyone in the Vexarian Galactic Alliance had imagined, not despite their weaknesses, but because of how they had learned to overcome them.